Well, let's open. We got thanks for the many blessings you've given us. Be with each of those mentioned here today, their needs. And help us to remember them in prayer and opportunities to help them. And lead, God, and direct us through their nation and the world. There's a joyous celebration going on in the hall.
I think it was a party they didn't invite us.
Somebody's class is giving shelter to the hall. I thought I would, I don't think we need to do a lengthy COVID update. COVID is continuing to decline. The biggest update for those who've already had vaccines is go get the new booster when your time is due.
We didn't see time to do this here.
Depends. If you had a case of COVID, you probably should wait maybe 3 months or so. I mean, it depends. Sometimes it depends what you do. They give ranges, but it's basically 3 months. If your last booster was a few months ago, you can probably wait, 2 to 3 months, something like that. But, and this booster, if you've never had a vaccine, this booster is apparently not the same dose as the others for the previous strains that we had. So they don't recommend starting with this. They recommend go back and get the other ones first and then go. So
Can you get the booster along with Prevnar 20 and or flu vaccine?
you can. That's if you're brave and bold. You can. Of course, in my office. Well, I don't have all those vaccines in my office anymore. Now, I've had pneumococcal in my office, flu vaccines. I purposely just separate my vaccines for at least a couple of weeks. That way, if you have a side effect, you at least know which one kind of bothers you.
Yeah.
But and most of them, I know the COVID vaccine. Every time I've taken that, I've got a really sore arm. So, some of the pneumococcal vaccines give you really sore arm. And the vaccine that makes does anybody know the vaccine tends to make people feel the very worst? Shingrix, yes. I've had more people tell me they felt terrible after the Shingrix. Now, not everybody. Some people didn't bother at all. Yeah, some people have no problem. But I've had other people tell me for 2 or 3 days felt like they had flu.
Some guy named Dr. Adam keeps telling me to get it.
Yep. But I'm still trying to figure out when's a good time to get the Shingrix.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, I have
we're
the
so bad.
shingles and I definitely got it because I don't want the
You don't want Shingrix? I agree with that.
I had it. She won't take it. I had a bad case of the shingles. I got a mild case of it.
Yeah.
No.
No, mine wasn't mild. The doctor walked in the room from the door. He said, "You got a shingles."
Oh, my.
And I was sitting in the chair.
Wow.
You don't want what rumors are always looking for.
And I heard the news where the flu shot will prevent a stroke.
And I've never heard that before, but I did hear it too.
Well,
Is that about the flu?
That's
That's all I can do it.
That's
If
what I-
having the flu creates an increased risk of stroke, then having the flu vaccine can decrease your risk of stroke.
yeah, so of course, it didn't do me. I had a shot at the meeting.
I was gonna say, I don't think I'll jump out and start right
No,
now.
I don't.
So,
I
I
told
think
him,
I'll sit preventing flu.
I said, they'll always say something that
Yeah.
you don't know.
Yeah. It's- At least somebody will say something positive.
Yeah.
Most people want to say something negative.
True.
And I checked on another thing. Does anybody happen to know when was the last really bad flu season that we had? In the last, say, decade, which was the worst year?
No, you tell us.
2017, 2018.
Okay.
That's good to know.
And it was estimated that 61,000 people in America died from.
Wow. I can remember sometime.
Was
that's-
it?
That was considered a bad flu.
Yeah.
When I say estimated, I didn't know this until I was researching a little bit. Some states are not required to report to the CDC their flu. So, I mean, most of them do. So it can be hard for the CDC. They have to base it on statistics and estimates for the flu, from both cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. It's probably easier to track hospitalizations because you've got actual reporting there. I know probably 20-something years ago, had a flu outbreak, and I thought, there were several strains of flu supposed to come back. I thought it'd be interesting. Let's just, if people would let me do it. I'd do a swab and send it to the CDC to find out what kind of strain it was. So I did that like in December or January. And in April, I found out what kind of flu they had.
Which wasn't long
Which was the last year that I ever did send samples. Because that didn't do me any good. But at least now you can test in your office if it's A or B. So we do that a lot. So that's a good thing. So. But anyway, and so a lot of cases of flu probably just don't get reported. But that was one of the worst flu seasons recently. I did look right before COVID in the year 2018, 2019, there were 490, almost 491 hospitalizations in this country from flu. And that year there was only 34,200 deaths. Now, when you say deaths from the flu, somebody's in the hospital for multiple reasons and they have the flu, it probably gets lumped into that. The flu was a contributing factor to their death, although it may not be the only reason they died. And I'm sure that's happened a lot with COVID too. I mean, a lot of times you've got underlying issues that you're going to be okay with until boom, something hits you, whether it's the flu or COVID. So.
Daryl, I respond to something Louis asked me to do, and I was running a little bit late getting in here.
Okay.
Louis said that it was time for us to decide how we're going to spend our money. So I did a look. With his help, he gave me a sheet of how much money we've given out over the last couple of years. And I made some copies. I totaled up how much we've given to each group. And so if I could pass these out so that Louis can find out. You keep talking while this up. This is what happens when you're late. You get caught at it. This is if I got enough. This sheet. She was something else.
One of the things I kind of thought about spending some money on, but the situation may be, well, I know they still need it. I know most of y'all probably feel horrible for people in Jackson, Mississippi who can't have water. I mean, water, you gotta have water to live, water to bathe, water to drink. I know a lot of places are sending truckloads of water. I don't know if hopefully the Presbyterian's involved in that. So indirectly, we're involved in that. That's just one thing. I know it's not in our county.
I had heard they were asking from the Red Cross in Mississippi was asking for money rather than sending the actual water.
So they can buy the bottle
So they-
out there rather than have to ship.
Right.
I can understand that. That's good.
And just as a follow-up to that, I just wanted to call out real quickly to look at how much we've given to our local people versus what we've sent away. So you'll see we haven't given all that much to McDonough Youth. And of course, Thornwell Home, that's kind of low on the list too. And the Calvin Center, only $500. So you might want to give a little bit, maybe break it up in increments of how much you want to give versus just give somebody the whole thing. But Louis, I'm gonna turn it over to you now to get that vote.
Well, about the youth, just to let you know, we had a shredding event yesterday and they raised over $2,000
That's great.
yesterday. And plus we will also, our company will also pay. So the youth should be in pretty good shape right now. But of course, they always want money, need money for their trips and so forth. I've had some correspondence from helping his name food pantry. I know Paul and Jackie were big followers of that. And we gave recently to a friend's house, which to my knowledge, we haven't got a thank you note, which is surprising. But right now we got $1,012. So I would recommend we at least make a gift of $500 or even $1,000 because the funds have been coming in pretty regular.
I'd like to mention Gigi's house because that's the place where they take the human trafficking people to heal and to take such good care of them. And that, a lot of that's been privately funded, but they can't just keep building more buildings on that one family's generosity. So that's another one that if your heart gets torn about knowing that people are trafficked.
I make a motion to give $750 to Ebony's. This name, food pantry this time. And we could do another 400 to something else, whatever y'all want to do.
How much do we have to give? I didn't hear.
We have $1,100. I'm sure this is gonna be full when I leave today.
Well, it's a pretty good start.
We gotta get that in here now.
It looks like it. Reverend I can be happy, there's no change in there.
Judy, do you want to make a
He said he never
recommendation
want to hear change,
or something else?
Anybody have a suggestion? Anyone have a suggestion?
I have a niece that works for trafficking. And I know how horrible it is and how terrible. I would suggest some to the Gigi's house.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to have them out. I can't just. send-
We got $1,100, you said?
Yeah. Just a
Maybe
So
difference.
you're gonna give the balance to Gigi's
Yeah,
house,
we
is
can
that what we're hearing?
Yeah, we can do
Yeah,
it.
that's good. That sounds good.
Okay.
So you said 750
To the food
to
pantry.
the food pantry.
Right, and balance.
So people in the county need food too.
Okay. There's lots of needs up there right now.
All of these, I mean, you could just, you could fill up. So 750 and then the balance is 350.
Right.
Okay.
Whatever the balance, I'll zero.
Do we need all vote on that?
I prefer you do.
All right, see, I'll second your motion. All in favor, say aye.
Ah,
All opposed? You can carry.
Judy, Judy, could you take that check that happened in San, because Paul and
I'd be glad to.
Yeah, because
I'll take that.
they usually take it.
Okay, be glad to.
I will get Janet that. Just
Just
check
tell
with her
Tom
for
when
it.
they're ready. Okay,
I'm sure she won't write it tomorrow, because I hope she'll count a lot of money.
I'll do it.
Now, for those of y'all who were here last week, started with the call of Abraham in Genesis. And we're continuing Abraham, we're skipping over to chapter 25.
Excuse me, Darryl, before you start, mention your schedule, because we're gonna have to do something.
I may be out 2 Sundays from now, I'm not sure yet,
But you said you might need 2 or 3 days.
but in October, I'm out like 3 in a row.
We need to be thinking about do some teaching.
I think real hard.
Louis, Louis, if I might could interject. The officers are planning on a celebration for George Tatro the last Sunday of September. That would be between the services. So it would be during the Sunday school hour, in which they're asking the Sunday school classes not to meet that last Sunday of September and have an extended fellowship to thank George Tatro for his service.
That solves
So we
one.
won't need a teacher that Sunday, what George is telling us, right?
Right, yeah.
And I also assumes that the person that's been helping teach will not be available in October, right?
Yeah, his last day.
That is correct.
I understand the new pastor, Paul, his wife wants to teach Sunday school.
Oh, that's good.
That's what they noticed I got.
Okay. Good.
We just hit her with it right off the bat.
Walk in the door, we need you to do this.
I think we should contact her ahead of time.
Send her a book.
George, George, do you know anything about that?
It's children's classes she's
Oh,
interested in.
okay.
For the children?
This is
Well, we're in our
it.
second child, so we
We're our
can't-
second child.
I don't know, when's the pastor coming?
I'm not sure. It's
Their
October.
voting is supposed to next week, right? In the vote.
The first of
Next week.
October.
Third, the Monday, the first Monday in October,
Right.
and then he'll preach the following Sunday.
That is correct.
Okay, all right. Well, that's exciting news. I was afraid, I would really think it'd probably take a lot longer.
It is exciting.
Yeah,
It is, very exciting.
good. All right.
Where
So,
do you get your information?
because I'm gonna.
I hadn't heard of it.
It came in the mail.
There was a email today.
I don't look at emails in, so that this first time, I didn't know.
We got all that.
I thought our committee was already looking for people. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was, there was a message came.
I don't read. Let's see.
Chuck Standard sent it out.
Yeah, Chuck sent it out, but they said it was discussed last Sunday at church.
It was.
But they gave the details at 11 o'clock. They didn't give the details that was at 8:30.
Oh, okay,
So if you, 8:30, we didn't have any
Yeah.
details.
okay.
So I'm gonna be out the 16th, 23rd, and 30th of October.
Wait a minute, let me write those down.
Yeah.
16th,
Yep, 23rd and 30th.
you know, I offered to Zoom, let Zoom you in. Wherever you are.
Well, two of it's gonna be tough. 'Cause I'm going with some family and going to a conference in Disney World.
Oh,
It's a good conference. It's a Mayo Clinic conference.
Yeah, right.
In internal medicine, yeah. Well, I just found out, I got a notice, all these things go on the computer. I didn't know this when I scheduled that conference. I've already met all my CME with everything. I didn't know. Now this on computer, I used to keep up with my paper. Now it's on computer. I'm like, I don't know how many hours. I just keep making hours.
So you don't need to go.
I turned in last hour. Yeah. So I mean, I could
So you
skip the
teach.
conference. What I'm gonna do is if this, I said, Adam, that fluctuates really, really boring. I'll see you later. I'm gonna go see Tom Buck with my granddaughter. So, but anyway, but it's glad, I'm glad to know I'm caught up. All right. Well, in Genesis, one thing I wanted to mention, we talked last time I was teaching, we talked about the commentators that we have and the thing that I said, the New International Version commentary. And the commentator for this one is Terrence. I hope I pronounced his name right. Fretheim. And he is the professor of Old Testament at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. And his church affiliation is the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. So that's commentary from which I look for information. So in chapter 25, last week y'all talked about Abraham, and chapter 25 starts out with Abraham dies. So, and remember who were the two main famous sons that Abraham had? He had a bunch of others by his other wives. Who was Abraham's famous?
Esau and Jacob.
Nope.
Sorry about that.
Isaac and
Ishmael.
Yeah.
Oh, I got the wrong part.
How about sons of Isaac?
Yeah, that's Jacob.
There they are. This is the right part.
There we go.
Oh, yeah.
There we
I was close.
And one of the things you have to notice in the Bible and in the stories, remember these stories occurred, the time of Abraham is probably around 1800, 1900 BC, somewhere in there. Depends on who you read. Some would say 2000. So a long time ago, these two guys were born and these two guys. And it's interesting to notice the parallels in the stories that develop. Each time, what's the common denominator in the mothers of these two and the mothers of these two?
They didn't have, they were barren.
They were married for years, they were both so older when they had children. Yeah. Those are common denominators in the stories of the origins of Israel. And we see that story kind of repeated over and over. One of the things, even in the New Testament, we see that John the Baptist's mother was in that same category, right?
Mhm.
But isn't it interesting? Jesus' mother was never barren. Isn't that interesting? In fact, she was more unique than that. In the scripture, being reported being a virgin in the two books that tell us the birth stories of Jesus. So, but anyway, so it's interesting to kind of look at the parallels telling this, and it's telling the story of Israel. In fact, this is so much the story of Israel is so much related to which one of these characters that he's actually called Israel.
Jacob.
Jacob, yes. The 12 tribes of Jacob, okay, the 12 tribes of Israel. So he becomes synonymous with the history of Israel in the telling of this story. And we have a lot more about him than we do about him. We have a lot about him and a lot about him. What, so that he comes as Israel. What nation does Esau, is he associated with? Edom. What does Edom mean? It's associated with being red or ruddy. What does Esau mean? Red or ruddy.
There's a lot of red rush going on.
Right. Yeah. So the names always seem to have some kind of significant meaning. So the other thing I want you to notice when we read this story today, there's Isaac and his wife. Who's his wife? And the mother of Jacob. It's been a while since we read Genesis. I think we read it only last year.
Isaac and Rebecca.
I think it's Rebecca.
Rebecca. Rebecca. All right, so there's Isaac and Rebecca, the parents of these two. Which one of those two prayed for a child? Isaac prayed for a child. Which one prayed because she was miserable when she was pregnant? Obviously, that's not Isaac. Rebecca. This is interesting. This is dichotomy there.
Pretty miserable too if she was.
She never had kids, so when she got them, it was a lot harder than she thought, I guess. I don't know. These stories happen relatively fast. And you'll notice here when we read them. And so in chapter 25, we start with the death of Abraham and some of his other wives that he had and all the different kids he had. And talk about Isaac and Ishmael both got together again and buried Abraham. And they buried him with his wife Sarah. So, and then we have a list of Ishmael's sons. So, and it's interesting because you got Isaac, and this line's going to be Israel. Ishmael seems to be more on the line of what we think of Arabs, or I mean, people say Muslims now because Muslims look back to Ishmael, just like the Jews look back to Isaac in this group right here. Edomites will look back to Esau. All right, so let's start now with verse 19. It says, this is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. And it quickly turns into the account of Jacob. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old. So we move very quickly from father, Abraham being his father. Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebecca. Now, so that's 40. Yeah, that's one of those recurring numbers in the Bible, 40. See that number a lot. He married Rebecca, daughter of Bethuel, I guess that's how you pronounce that, the Aramean from Padan Aram, and the sister of Laban, the Aramean, or Aramean. That looks more like Aramean to me. So, all right. So Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. So he did this for his wife, right? He wants a son, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
But she's barren, so he's praying for her. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebecca became pregnant. The babies jostled each within her. So now, Rebecca did not have the benefit of an ultrasound, did she? I mean, we haven't been doing ultrasounds all that long. We had 3 children, never had an ultrasound. That's not all that long ago. Last one was born in '84. Not that they weren't doing ultrasounds, They were doing them sometimes, but usually there was a reason
Right.
to do an ultrasound, not just to say, oh, let's check out the baby. So, I kind of like not knowing what they're gonna be until they're born.
Amen.
I
There's
did.
so few real surprises in this life.
So we didn't have if we'd had a reveal party, we just revealed we had a baby.
Yeah. And everybody be excited about that, wouldn't they?
Well, you have to reveal it or not, or explain why your wife's being that way. She'd rather explain that she's having a baby. Most cases. All right. So the Lord answered prayer and his wife Rebecca became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her. And she said, why is this happening to me? My explanation as a doctor would be, if she asked me that, I said, well, you're pregnant. And the babies are moving around. And you might be able to determine at some point that there's two babies in there and not one. There's ways to do that without having to do an ultrasound. Depends on how far along someone is. But that's not the point of the story. But anyway, why is this happening to me? So she went to inquire of the Lord. It almost sounds like nobody ever explained to her what it's like to be pregnant. So,
It may not have.
all right, so the Lord said to her, and we don't really know how this came about, because we know what the Lord said to her so long ago. But this is, remember, these stories have been, these have been oral traditions passed down for years, years and years and years before they're ever written down. The book of Genesis was written down past the time of David, when it really was compiled. So that's a long time ago, actually, they were there. So a long time after. So anyway, the importance is what we have related here. Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And then it says, when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first came out with red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. Some verses say, some of them say a mantle, don't they? Which is like a cloak or something. Some say a hairy mantle, but like a hairy garment, same thing. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. So according to that, she had been married, we would assume that they'd been married for 20 years when these babies were born. So that's, that would put Isaac being now 60 years old. I'd have to do a little more research so we can figure out how old Rebecca was. That might be in there somewhere. I don't know how that Rebecca was when they got married. But again, it's hard when you're looking back on these stories to really hang your head on these ages. I mean, because Genesis had stories where people were 900 years old, and 800 years old, 700 years old. The human body did not make it last that long. And historically, people have been living longer lately than they used to. That's starting going back down a little bit. But people have been. So it's unusual now. Think of how old somebody looks at 100 years old or 120. Not very many people. It's rare for somebody to make 115, 120. But think how old they look. Can you imagine going another 600 or 700 years?
Yeah.
I mean, and you think about it, dimension risks are pretty high when you're 100 years old.
Yeah.
But that's the reason I say you shouldn't get hung up on the years. A lot of people think they did some of those years to try to put a history together and bring some kind of time into everything. Try to explain some things. But anyway, the thing we know is that we do know that Isaac and Rebekah got married, and she was barren for a period of time, and then they had children, they had twins. And this story explains the significance of the twins, and they're descendants of Abraham, to whom God gave the promise. So it says the boys grew up. So this is moving fast, isn't it? We went from marriage, married 20 years, 2 children in the womb, birth, and now we're still in the same chapter. And then we've got boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man, stayed among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now that's interesting. We do know sometimes in families that sometimes the mother gets closer to one child, the dad gets closer to another child. The middle child always claims that neither one of them cares. If you have a middle child. So you have like 4, you don't have a middle child. You have 2 middle children who say that, I don't know. But it is interesting how people, sometimes personalities are just closer to other personalities, whether that's a mother, father, brothers, sisters, or 2 friends. But we can even think about that. For instance, my brother is about to go on his annual hunting trip to Newfoundland. He takes a flight from Anglers in Kansas. From Kansas, he goes somewhere in Canada. Then gets on another little hopper plane to go out into the wilds of Newfoundland, where he meets a scout who takes him out in the tundra out there to go hunting for moose, caribou, and a couple of things. I mean, he's got a couple record moose that he's caught in that area over the years. So, and it's cold and it can be wet. And I may have told y'all this story before. One time he was hunting the moose and he realized he was being hunted himself. A bear was tracking him. Yeah.
That'd be the end of my hunting trip.
Yeah, he told me the bear got close to him. It was a pretty big bear. So he shot him with a bow and arrow, shot him in the shoulder. He said the bear actually took his paw, reached up and grabbed the arrow and pulled it out. And then my brother's like, oh no. And the bear looked at him and turned around and took off running. Thank goodness.
I can't believe he's still alive.
Well, he had another encounter with a little bear, where a little bear was out there, and the little bear and he scared each other. So they were both trying to climb up on the same rock to get away from each other, so they were both going round and round this rock. Of course, where there's a little bear, there's sometimes bigger.
Oh, I know. Exactly.
He did not shoot the bear. And he would have shot the other bear, he said he thought the bear was about to attack him. Plus, you can hunt bear there too. So.
Good.
So anyway, and he's always a good fisher. We used to go fishing as kids a lot, and anytime I caught a fish, I went, here, take him off there, will you? He didn't care. He grabbed a fish, grabbed a crab, anything. I just couldn't do it. So, or didn't want to do it. Let's put it that way. I did some. Sometimes he would refuse. So I don't like to hunt nor fish. I do that sometimes. So actually, when I go play golf, I do hunt for my ball in the woods and I fish it out of creeks and the lakes. That's when I do my hunting and fishing. So my point of my story there is people within the same family can be so different. So, and that's what was true in this case. Esau was a hunter. Jacob stayed around and hung around the tent.
Thank God.
Play golf. It sounds like he stayed closer to mom, doesn't it, in a way, than where she was at. And Esau went out hunting and brought food, and Isaac liked that because he brought him back some good game, tasted good. So didn't say that he and Isaac went hunting together. A lot of fathers and sons hunt together. Didn't say they hunted together. Maybe Isaac was getting so old he didn't want to hunt anymore. I don't know. The story you can't. You'd have to make up something if you want to try to fill that in. So it says once when Jacob was cooking. So now see, he liked to stay behind and cook. The other guy liked to hunt for food. So maybe Jacob liked to be a chef. Yeah, he liked to be a chef. So once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country. He was famished. He said to Jacob, quick, let me have some food. No, let me have some of that red stew. Again, there's that red again. So Esau, who is going to be later the father of this nation, Edom, red, and he wants some red stew. So you have to follow the colors here. So he wants some red stew. Of course, there's a lot of stews that are red, right? You got tomatoes in it, turns it red. Anyway, doesn't tell us what kind it was, just says red stew. Says, I'm famished. And this, about the Red Stew, my Bible says parenthetically, which means somebody added this later to explain it. That is why he was also called Edom. And that's in parentheses there. Jacob replied, first, sell me your birthright. Now, my first question, why just give your hungry brothers a bowl of stew? Makes you wonder how close they were to one another anyway. But quite frankly, we wouldn't have this story. The whole purpose of the story is to tell us about this birthright. But you'd think a brother would just say, hey, man, here, eat some of this. By the way, can I cook some of that food in your pocket? So, but anyway, so Jacob replied, first, sell me your birthright. Now, why did Esau have the birthright? Why did Jacob want Esau's birthright?
He was the oldest.
He was the
The oldest son.
firstborn.
The firstborn, yeah, he's the firstborn son. And who traditionally in Israel, and in a lot of places, has rights to the property of the family and so forth. Firstborn son. Yeah, so, and you think that may be something old, but I'm thinking about Vicky's family on her mother's side. Her grandfather had 3 girls, one was Vicky's mother, and 1 son, who was the youngest, and left most of everything that he had business-wise, property-wise, to the son. Even though the girls were the ones that pretty well took care of them as they got older. So, and then when that son died not too many years ago, he had a son, and then a daughter. The middle son passed away years ago at a young age. So he had the oldest son who was a lawyer, and then he had a daughter who was a school teacher. And when he died, he had his son who was a lawyer set up his will, which I think is kind of a mistake. That's an invitation to trouble in a family. So I'm getting around this, and family squabbles over birthrights is not anything new. So then most of it was left to his son, not his daughter. Well, then they took it to court, and most of it went to the daughter, which is created. The reason I mentioned this, not too long ago, we went to that particular branch of Vicky's family's reunion at the 600-something acres that the daughter now owns. And the brother was there, and they had not really been around each other a long time. Their mother's still alive, but it's created a big division in the family. So those things still happen. These birthright issues still happen. So anybody who's worked with people, anybody who's worked like in funeral homes or lawyers or even doctors have seen families that when somebody's about to die, people, the old term is people start calling out the woodworks to see who can get what. Sometimes it seems like the fact that somebody died was kind of not the big deal. The big deal is who gets what. So unfortunately, sometimes. But anyway, so that's not a new situation. So he wanted his birthright because he wanted that power to have what the firstborn son would have, knowing that he was only second born by like what, probably a second. So, and then it says, so Esau says to Jacob, look, I'm about to die. What good is a birthright to me? So now either he's truly about to die, that's a possibility, or he's just so hungry he can't stand it. But anyway, he said, so what good's a birthright to me? But Jacob said, swear to me first. So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of stew. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then he got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. So Esau didn't appreciate what he had, but God had already said that Jacob was the one that he was going to make a great nation out of. So these are stories that kind of explain how things develop. And that's a rather quick story to explain that. And there's more chapters in here about Jacob. Our next lesson is going to be further along. We got to get going. We spent a lot of time talking about other stuff, which is all right. The lesson's fairly short. Genesis 32, Jacob's called Israel, so we'll be still doing that next week. So we'll get more about Jacob next week. And we'll finish up Genesis at the end of the, end of this month. Does anybody have any questions? Observations?
I was just thinking about the two babies in the womb, if one was real hairy,
Right.
maybe it was annoying the other one, that was why they tumbled. I mean, you know, wouldn't that make sense?
They were fraternal twins,
Mhm.
so they might not have been able to have that kind of contact.
Oh.
I don't know.
That's what I know.
I mean, not they weren't close to each other. I think. They were fraternal because they didn't look just like, not identical. Because we did say both of them were in. So, and Harry, so. In fact, we know later when Isaac's dying, that, you know, the hand was too smooth on one compared to the other's old hairy hand, so,
He was blind.
yeah, so he had to go by the feel. So,
Well, he must not have been around too many boys because brothers are gonna fight and they're gonna wrestle and they're gonna do all that kind of stuff and,
right,
and I have a very fond, not then, but now memory of one son putting hot sauce all over a sandwich and giving it to his brother. So, yeah.
yeah. It'd be a little unusual for a couple of kids to say, you gotta sell me your birthright. They probably don't even know what they're talking about. Yeah. It wouldn't matter anyway. It wouldn't hold up in court of law, would it? So, I don't know if, you know, the court of law is not the point here. I don't know. How would you hold up the, well, he agreed to give me his birthright over his too. Oh, where's that written down at? You both sign it? So, I mean, it was just their word. It counted as a contract. So. All right. Listen. Y'all remember when we discussed these stories? None of us wrote them, we just read them, right? And try to learn from them. So, and there's something to learn from them. So let's go to prayer. We gotta thank you for this day. Thank you for this historical lesson to review and understand what we are to learn from it and apply it to the day and time in which we live. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.
What's good?
God, thanks.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, I did hear you say
I
that.
kept saying that. I kept saying that.
No, I heard you say that too. I thought you told about the other.
Yeah, for her. No, she would be sitting right next to him.